I was interim pastor of a church that, I'm not from Tennessee, but I was interim pastor of a church in Tennessee. It was the first, how do I put it? It was the first southern church I'd ever been in. They called me brother, which I'm from Long Island, outside of New York City, and the brotherhood was the mafia. And so, people calling me brother was a little weird, but it was a large church, 9,000 members. People wore robes in the choir, and the pastor died suddenly, and it was a tragic thing. And so my job, I was going to fill in while he recovered. I had an 8-week message series that I was going to fill in while he recovered, but he didn't recover. He died soon thereafter the surgery. So they asked me to do this series, and they asked me to stay on as interim. And I thought, the guy had pastored the church and gone from hundreds to thousands, and I didn't know I wanted to be the interim during the deconstruction. We all know the typical decline that takes place in a church like that. But what was fascinating was the church didn't decline. And I'd like to think it was because of my remarkable preaching, because I was so culturally aware of that traditional church in a southern cultural context. Let's just say no. I said, you got a problem with that? Forget about it. But they stayed together because 94% of them were in groups. On a percentage attendance, 94% on a given week was in small groups compared to the Sunday worship attendance. So the pastor died, some loudmouth Yankee that was brand new to the community becomes the interim, and they don't decline. They actually grow by a few percentage points in the 2 years we were there. Why? Because the connections were already there, evident and present. So what we find is, if you want to have groups matter and not just mere groups matter, there are 3 actions you have to take, and we've seen them very clearly over and over again. These won't be news to you. They develop your leaders. Develop your leaders. And what we find is, to be perfectly honest, is that there is lip service to this, and leadership development in most churches, even churches that have small group leadership development, is horrendous and actually demotivates the very leaders you're trying to empower, inspire, and engage. So please, if you're gonna, how do I put this nicely? If your group training's gonna suck, don't have it. Is that too strong? Is that all right? Fine. That was Long Island. I broke open a little bit of a can there, didn't I, right now? I apologize. A little Long Island there. But I'm telling you, that's what we found. But develop your leaders, and there might be resources that you use. We have a thing called Ministry Grid going to launch where it helps people with some of the world's best leadership training, because it's harder and harder to get people to come to groups training. But it ought not cause us to say, well, we can't do groups training. We have to find ways and means to do that. Why? Because groups matter. Now, again, at this point, anyone who's been around for more than 30 years is saying, they're just talking about Arthur Flake. Yes, we totally stole all of Arthur Flake's ideas. We just modernized them. Flake's formula, things of that sort. But again, leaders reproduce who they are. You've got to develop them. You've got to have this holy cause and effect that those God gave some as apostles, some as teachers for the training of the saints and the work of ministry. And I want you to hear this. I believe that one of the great challenges in the Protestant church, I'm guessing we're all Protestants, mainliners, evangelicals. One of the great challenges for most Protestants is they look more like pre-Reformation Roman Catholics than they do like Protestants, where there's one holy man. He's the only one who can read the Bible and explain it to the people. He has to use complicated Greek terms that they never learned in seminary. And if anyone wants to meet Jesus, they got to come to the pastor. And the pastor has sort of become the center. We have clergified the church. And the clergification of the ministry leads to the destruction of the ministry of the laity. One of the ways that we've seen health and life in church is to develop leaders who then take up pastoral function and role in the life of the church. Second is launch new groups, the continuous process of multiplication. We know this to be the case. Even in my own church, I know, we just did a big outreach, and I know if we're going to preserve the people who've come, if we're going to find them and reach them, to quote one of my heroes, Gary McIntosh, I'm going to recognize it's going to take new groups, because new groups connect more than people in existing groups. And then thirdly, you got to feed the people. And there's different ways. Sometimes it's mission and we're learning the word as we go. Sometimes it's the word that leads us ultimately to and on mission. But ultimately just gathering people in groups without giving them something to talk about it's just a recipe for boredom and eventual dropout. I never knew, one of the things we do, I became this curriculum editor when I came to Lifeway. I edit this thing called The Gospel Project. And we started about a year and a half ago, and kind of this robust theological look at small groups, and we have it all ages, and like 500,000 people use it a year later. And one of the things we hear from people over and over again is we wanted to grow, not just to kind of flippantly say that we're meeting, because the word God sacrifice is what sanctifies. Now, let me close with this. 75% of group leaders report they want direction. We actually surveyed group leaders. I didn't put that on the list of methodologies. We surveyed everybody. We surveyed people walking by the church. Not really. But we surveyed group leaders, and you know what they say? Man, they want more direction. They want to be part of a bigger vision. They want to be part of a plan. I'm convinced that one of the things we're going to have to remind the church is your groups matter. in years to come. I think ultimately, if I could be blunt, I think the small groups phenomenon has failed to produce the breakthrough that many intended and hoped. But I don't think it was, I think the issue is that part of it, we got to break down the clergification, share the ministry, and see a more broadly engaged mission in the life of our church. So there are bigger issues, and groups couldn't fix them all, but they can fix some. So my hope is that transformational groups, the research that we'll share, and ultimately the book we publish, will provoke to love and good deeds God's people to live in community so they'll live on mission. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you.